Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth Series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Monday, January 2nd. So Happy New Year. I hope the New Year is off to a great start for all of you, and thank you for being with us today. We're really pleased to be joined in our studio by 4 of our area state representatives to get the new year off to a great start, our first show of the year, as a matter of fact. Really pleased to have with us here Representative Kathleen James, who represents, along with Representative Seth Bongartz, the Bennington-District, which includes the towns of Manchester, Arlington, Sandgate, and a part of Sunderland. Also good to have with us Representative David Durfee, who represents the town of Shaftesbury and the other part of Sunderland that Kathleen and Seth don't represent. And finally, we're really pleased to have with us today Representative-elect still, Mike Rice. I guess on Wednesday, January 4th, when the legislature is sworn in, you'll become the full-blown representative. But great to have you with us today, Mike. Mike's district includes the towns of Dorset, Danby, Landgrove, Peru, and Mount Tabor. And again, thank you all for making the time for our conversation today to talk with us a little bit about what you're anticipating issues and questions that will be coming up in the legislature this session. It'll be starting on January 4th. And I guess just to kind of get us started, it's going to be a very different legislature from the one that you left behind last spring when the legislature adjourned. A large turnover in representatives and state senators. I think we have, if I'm correct, about 40 new state representatives coming in that weren't there last year.
50.
50,
yeah.
Okay. Going on the conservative side, but hey. And also over on the state Senate side, we have, 11 new state senators out of a 30-member body there. So more than 1/3 of the state Senate will be new folks. And of course, there'll be a new president pro temp as well. Phil Baruth will be taking over the reins from Becca Ballant, who, of course, is moving on to the U.S. Congress. But anyway, on that note, I guess Representative James, let me start with you, since you're also you're an assistant majority leader now.
Yep.
Congratulations on that. That's quite an honor. So, what is your sense of how the legislature is going to be operating then with not only a lot of new members, but also your Democratic Party will have a supermajority, I guess is the word, 104 members, plus several other progressives and independents. So that would give a fairly comfortable margin, it would seem on its face, when it comes to overriding a gubernatorial veto, where 100 votes are needed to override. I think we have to go back to 1966, when the Republican Party had 115 members in the State House to have a number of legislators who are not the same member as the governor's party. And Governor Scott, as we know, over the past 6 years while he's been governor, has issued a record number of vetoes. So it wouldn't be surprising if on some of the issues we might see a veto override vote coming up. So Kathleen, what is your takeaway on that? Do you think that's going to be the case, that unlike last year when a couple of veto override votes didn't make it over the finish line, and by a very narrow margin in some cases, it's going to be a different story this year?
I guess I'm thinking simultaneously about what's going to be new and different and what's going to remain the same. So, as you mentioned, we have a really record number of new members on the House side. We have 50 new members. I think 40 of those are brand new Democrats. We have a significant number of new chairs. We had a lot of retirements, and so we lost a lot of our most experienced committee chairs. So we're going to have a lot of new members, about 1/3 of our body, and a significant number of new committee chairs as well. And so I think it's really important to sort of be realistic and manage our expectations about what it's going to be like to have that many new folks in the House. The committees are going to be starting from scratch in many ways. As we all know, any bill that didn't make it across the finish line in the last biennium is dead and gone. So we've kind of sweep the floor clean with all that old legislation. We've got a lot of new members to kind of bring up to speed. So I think realistically, I think we need to understand that a lot of those initial weeks are going to be spent with committees learning the basics, These are the issues that we focus on, getting in a lot of testimony to get members grounded in, some of the topics that they'll be covering, and having the new chairs get all the new folks up to speed and getting used to working together as a team, because that's a lot of people. So there's that. And then, what remains the same, I think, is, regardless of whether we have an expanded majority or not, regardless of how many numbers we may have, we're coming into the session looking to reach out to Governor Scott, looking to collaborate with his administration, and looking to try to come together on as many policies as we can. Try to bring everybody to the table early, and I don't think that's going to be anything different. So I certainly don't think that the Democrats are coming in looking to flex their numbers. I think, as we always do, we start the session looking to reach out to the administration and to Governor Scott and to come together on so many of the shared priorities. I think every single one of us at the table will say that we are hearing the same priorities again and again and again from Vermonters. And that's the same for Democrats as it is for Republicans. We're talking about housing, we're talking about childcare, we're talking about expanding our work on climate. We've got a lot of priorities that I think are shared.
Okay, well, one of the issues I gather that will be coming up fairly quickly is the question of paid family leave. You mentioned that there a couple of years ago, a bill came up. The governor came up with another proposal that was sort of a voluntary plan. And last month, the governor kind of came back and revisited that plan, came up with a proposal, I guess costed out roughly around $2 million, that would give all working Vermonters access to affordable paid family and medical leave insurance by 2025. But I gather that wasn't exactly received with overwhelming warmth by the legislature, or members of the legislature anyway, where you folks would like to see a more comprehensive plan, I guess is one way of putting it. And I guess what do you think is going to be happening on that front? Is that going to be one of the first issues you'll be tackling, do you anticipate? Or is it going to be just sort of going to take a while to, digest a little bit?
I don't have any insight into when we might take it up, but or to be honest, whether we'll take it up this year. I would imagine that it's something that we'll try and tackle. And yes, I think we are looking at something different from the plan that from the concept that the governor put forward. And we, as you mentioned, 3 years ago, if I have the timing correct, passed a bill that failed by just a single vote to become law on a veto override. That was a universal paid family leave, parental leave specifically, and that I think it's important to point out the paid family leave. Does that include more than a few weeks for new parents? Does it also include time off if you need to care for a sick family member, maybe an adult family member? So there's a couple of different directions we could go. And I guess I would just say the voluntary plan the governor put forward is an employer-based plan. And to me anyway, that's just not the way to set up a new system. We have a health insurance system that is largely based on employers providing it as a benefit. That system it doesn't work. We figured that out a long time ago, and it's unfortunate that when the system first, when that approach first started back in the 1940s, we didn't know what it was going to look like, 80 years later. So no, I don't think we want to go that direction. And frankly, I think we're looking for a benefit that's not only universal, but that is more generous than the one that the governor put forward.
Anyone else wants to chime in on that, or? Well, it certainly has been a topic of a lot of conversation, and ties into a couple of other areas, which we'll probably get to in a few minutes. Housing and workforce development, obviously, what I've been hearing anyway, I'm sure all the rest of you had too, is that it's difficult for many working families for both parents to be working, even though there are so many help wanted signs out there all over the place and a super tight labor market going on. That having some kind of greater flexibility for some of those working parents to, have paid family leave and then childcare, which maybe we can jump to next, in place to help them with that. And what are we expecting to see happening on childcare? Is there any proposal going on out there that you're going to be working on, or some kind of ideas that are going to crystallize into a piece of legislation?
I'm not sure. Did you want to go? Are you about to go?
Well,
I
I would just say I'm obviously not clued into whether somebody has a proposal that they're going to introduce, right when we get there or when that happens. But I'll say I know that over the past few years, the legislature has set a goal of making sure that families are paying no more than 10% of household income, and that at the same time, the people who work day in and day out in early childhood education centers, childcare centers, are paid a fair living wage. So those are the things that need to in tandem be a part of any solution we work toward. And I'll just say, I know, over the course of the campaign, it was one of the things I heard at almost every door I knocked on in all 5 of my towns, and I hear from future colleagues in just about every town all over the state that this is sort of top of list and most affecting whether working people, families can afford to come to or stay in our communities.
How would you? Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to riff on what Mike said a little bit, which is that if you look at paid family leave and childcare together, it's part of an approach that really it extends a promise basically to Vermont families that if you are going to raise your children here or move here to raise your children, that we're going to help you make a financially stable and solid life. We're going to provide a childcare system that is high quality, that is accessible, that families can afford. We're going to provide you with a paid family and medical leave program. That means that you will have the time that you need to take care of your children, to take care of yourself, to take care of your families or an ailing family member. And I'll add that last year we really, we made history by passing a child tax credit. And that's going to be taking effect for families in 2023. It was I think, fantastic extension of the federal child tax credit that had been rolled out during the pandemic. And I believe, Dave, you can remind me of the numbers, but I believe it's $1,000 for every child 5 and under. So we're putting together basically a vision for what it means to raise a family in Vermont. Childcare, paid family leave, the child tax credit. It's part of a package, and it's how I think we see things.
Yeah, and all of those things will help Vermont not be the state with the lowest birth rate.
That's exactly.
Which we are at the moment. We all know we're an aging state, and we need more young people in schools. We need more young people coming out of schools into the workforce. And for the past several years, we've had either the lowest or second or third lowest, I think, birth rate. So having that promise to new families, I think, will make a difference.
Because people can't afford to have children.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if you add to that the work we did last year on universal school meals, that'll be something that'll come up in this biennium, I'm sure. We've got, we extended universal school meals through this current school year. So every child that attends school in Vermont receives a, hot, nutritious breakfast and lunch, and, regardless of their family's ability to pay. And That's going to run out this year, and I feel confident that that's something that we'll be taking a look at trying to figure out how to extend.
Yeah, when you talk to educators, they talk about that universal school meals all the time, and what a huge impact that's had in your school system and for the kids they serve.
And when you talk to students too,
And
we were all at a touring school together a couple months ago, and one of the first things we heard from one of our student tour guides was how important that program has been in the school.
So how would that be paid for? I mean, any thoughts? Have we gotten to that point yet as to what the tax impact would be, or would this be money that might come from some of the federal money that's available, or?
That'll be what the legislature will have to take up.
You know, we have a lot of priorities that all make a lot of sense, but there is going to be so much money, so decisions are going to have to get made. But that'll happen through the process of the committee structure, and then in the end through the appropriations committee.
This year, the universal school meals were paid for out of a surplus in the ed fund, the education fund, and I don't think it's at all clear anyway that we'll continue to provide that that benefit using that source. It could be, but not necessarily.
Always a $64,000
Yes,
question,
yes,
or maybe it's a $64 million question, whatever. But yeah, well, all right. Well, that's pretty interesting. Well, let me move on to then another issue that I'm sure you all heard a lot about on the campaign trail: housing. Not a new topic by any means. It's been a topic of conversation around the state and probably around the country for quite a while now. We have apparently a very desperate need of new housing, affordable housing, workforce housing in the state. And I know that out of some of the federal ARPA money the state has received, there's been some set aside to help jumpstart that. And my understanding anyway is that several thousand new housing units are being at least planned or proposed. But Seth, you have been very active on this in this area here, and I gather you're in the middle of working very closely on two housing related bills that you're going to be hoping to
One in
submit?
particular.
One in particular. Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Last year, Kathleen and I put together a bill H511 that made it easier to build affordable housing on the one hand, and at the same time made it easier to build any kind of housing in downtowns. And that passed. And this year, what I've been focusing on with sort of the same group of stakeholders that Kathleen and I worked with last year is a bill to look at the way that zoning can have a discriminatory impact. Not intended, but often can have a discriminatory impact because of things like large lot requirements, parking requirements, density, low density. And we're looking at some of those things that really make it hard to build housing in downtowns and trying to knock some of those out of the way so that we can, because we have to build tens of thousands of units of housing in Vermont. And really the only place if there's one place that makes sense to do it, it's in downtowns, especially those with sewer and water connections. Where else makes sense? That's what makes sense. And yet we have ordinances that were written 50 years ago in some instances with large setback requirements, large lot sizes, all kinds of things that get in the way of actually affecting what we all know we need to do. And so it's just like, let's clear some of that out of the way and make it easier to build housing where we really want it, which is in downtowns, especially those with sewer and water. And so that's what this bill is about. A lot of work over the summer, fall, and into the session, and we'll see what happens.
So if
It's getting some traction. It's getting some attention and getting some traction.
If that bill passes in roughly the same form that you have in mind, I mean, how quickly do you think that would translate into actual housing starts happening?
It's hard to answer that question. There is some money in it to help towns change their bylaws to meet the new requirements. But, by the way, a lot of towns are already there. This is in some ways just help, because if we wait, everybody's kind of wants to do this, I think, they heard this direction, but if we wait for it to happen, it'll take 20 years for all the towns getting around. This is just like, let's just get this done. A year or maybe 2 years. I don't know how long it will take. But I think it will make towns, as they're immediately when they're doing any kind of revision, they'll switch to this. And then some will go back through, comb back through, and try to bring them into compliance. And I think actually a lot of towns want to do this, and this is really just an incentive. And sometimes being told you have to do it will help get it done.
In the immediate, Andrew, too, we can talk about building on all the momentum. We've invested $375 million in housing over the past several years, and that money is flowing. So it's across a wide range of programs. That's everything from, housing unhoused Vermonters to the VHIP program, which is one that I think we're all enthusiastic about. That provides property owners with grant money to bring basically apartments that aren't up to code. So you can get those back on the market and into the rental market. It includes money to help property owners create accessory dwelling units on their properties. It includes quite a bit of money to Vermont Housing Conservation Board and other partners to build, and services for housing services as well. So we've got $375 flowing, and I think in many other ways we'll look to build on that momentum this year as well.
And part of it is to get that money out, you have to be able to, ironically, you have to be able to spend it. And you have to, and some of the work that we're doing on this bill is to help make it possible to spend that money, and especially spend it in the right places.
Another aspect of this is, I heard an interesting statistic the other day I wasn't aware of. Is that Vermont has the second oldest housing stock in the country. And that another way of tackling this problem might be to incentivize homeowners to, upgrade their current housing stock. Would that be part of the legislation you're anticipating, or is that a whole separate?
It's not part of what I'm doing. I've kept my focus narrow to.
Could be where that VHAP program comes in.
And indirectly, one of the things that's going on generationally is that there are a lot of older people living in houses that are much bigger than they actually even need to live in or want to. And yet there's no place for them to go and turn that house over to a young family. But we don't have the housing for them to move to. So therefore we're stuck with the status quo. And so a lot of this, it's all related, as is always the case, everything's related. So it's in part, it's building the right size housing. We need everything from studios to 1 bedrooms to 2 bedrooms. And just a lot of choices, but allow somebody like that you were indirectly referring to, a couple in their 70s with their kids long gone, living in a house that is like, 4 times what they need or whatever or want.
We have that interesting missing middle pilot up and running now too, and funded. I think we wound up putting $15 million into that. That's a brand new program that aims to basically help developers bridge the gap or cover that cost between what it's costing right now to build housing for the missing middle and what folks can afford to pay for that, to buy a home. And so that's a really interesting pilot program that I think we were very supportive of, and it is, I believe, up and running now with $15 million in the pot. And I'll be very curious to see how that works out, because it's I think, a super idea.
I had a chance to look through the bill that Seth's been working on this morning, and was impressed by the breadth and how much work went into talking with a whole range of stakeholders to try and put something together that would not be hung up either in the Senate or when it gets to the governor's desk, and hopefully that will be the case. Although, if we can get it through the first week, then we can move on to other things. We've talked about this. We have you mentioned older retired couples, and we want to have policies in the state, and we do, that discourage new housing that takes forests, for example, that cuts down trees, or that takes current open space and turns it into housing. So we have those policies, and I think we all agree, that's the Vermont that we want. But if we're going to have that, we also need to have, where is the housing going to go? And I think that conceptually we agree, it makes sense to have it in downtowns or in areas where there is infrastructure in place and where there's walkable neighborhoods and services that you can get to. So this is really just, I feel it's taking, what we all sort of say we want and making it easier to get there. And again, these zoning practices have at one point they seem to make sense, but unintentionally they may have led to discrimination of one sort or another.
I wanted to follow up a bit on the zoning thing there, Seth. If this new legislation that you're working on passes, does that mean that towns would have to overhaul their zoning regulations to conform to
Yes.
it? Okay.
Yep. Now, it's not going to be the whole zoning. It's going to be actually small parts of the zoning, but just with a handful of changes will have to be made in every zoning ordinance.
And if some towns say, well, we don't want to do that, that's what happens then.
Well, zoning is, municipalities institute zoning as creatures of the state. And by that I mean there's enabling legislation. They already are subject to enabling legislation. This is just tweaking the enabling legislation
Okay.
and saying this is one set of requirements in order to have your planning and zoning.
Well, following up on all of that is, of course, a related question around workforce and supply chains, which, of course, we can't do anything about. But the workforce is another area that has been discussed a lot. As you mentioned a moment ago there, Dave, we have an old population. There seems to be a shortage of young workers coming up who are actually going to build these houses and do all the other construction. Any of you have any thoughts on some legislation that might be coming up or is there even anything you can do about that to try and amplify the number of workers in the workforce that would be building new housing units or whatever else might seem necessary? We have an aging population. Is that any signs of that turning around?
Well, I think just briefly, one of the things that we can do to invest in our workforce is invest in childcare and invest in paid family leave.
Right.
And housing.
And housing.
And housing.
Yeah.
It's all related, right?
Check. Yep.
But I do think there are ways, I think it's important to make sure we're, at the same time that we're investing in healthcare workers and childcare workers, that we're investing in people in the trades and making sure that those programs are there to educate folks to go into the trades, to build housing, to build renewable energy infrastructure that's needed to sort of bring us along in all these areas that we say we know we need to do, is making sure we're supporting those folks going into the trades and making sure that that's a viable option for folks. And I think another way we do that is with wages. It's important that those are going to be jobs that pay living wages and that folks can afford to live here.
What is the living wage, the minimum wage in Vermont now? Is it 13?
$12.50.
$12.50? On its way to 13,
$12.55.
and I think it was going to be over $13 an hour.
It just went up yesterday, right?
Yeah.
From $12.55. Okay, yeah.
To
Something else.
13 something, yep.
Although, as we have talked about, it's effectively higher than that.
Right. I would
almost all
imagine many
instances,
employers
maybe not
looking to
all.
hire somebody and they offer $13 an hour. Is
Yeah.
probably going to say,
A lot
well,
of people
But
see you later.
paying 20. Yeah.
But
I think in all of these things, I also come back to, the monumental amount that we've done of work that we've done over the past couple of years. And we passed a major workforce development bill just this past year, S11. It invested almost $114 million into a variety of workforce development initiatives. And so I think one of the things that's going to be a top priority, I certainly heard this emerge in all of our pre-session meetings and from leadership and from the speaker. I think one of the things we're going to very much need and want to do is going to be to spend a little bit of time looking at all the programs we've been standing up and all of the ARPA dollars we've been allocating, and make sure that the programs are up and running and that they're working well and that the dollars are going where we intended them to go and that they're being effective. And so I think there's going to be in this, it really gets back to the very first question you asked, Andrew. I think that there's a lot of interest in this upcoming session on oversight and accountability,
that's right.
and taking a look at all of the ARPA dollars and where we intended them to go and how they're all working. And so I think that's going to be a top priority this year.
Can I just go back and close the loop? I think, by the way, I think that's exactly right. But go back and close the loop on workforce development and the lack of plumbers, electricians. There's even lack of attorneys in Vermont. That's all related to our demographic problem as well. And the demographic problem is related to housing, childcare. You can't afford to, it's very hard to have kids. So people making the decision not to have children, which then leads to this cycle that we're in now. And what we're trying to do with everything we've been talking about today is reverse that cycle. So that's the point. It's all like not just connected. It's all almost the same issue.
Mike made a great point about the trades too, and we did pass out a bill this past year and these are the kinds of things that always sound so technical and boring, but really aren't. It's basically tasked the Agency of Education with putting together an action plan for how we fund and govern our career and technical education system in Vermont, and how we fund the CTE system and how we govern the CTE system has a tremendous impact on how many students can attend can attend schools like Southwest Tech down in Bennington. So I think that action plan is actually not due to the legislature until I think a year from now. But when it comes out, it's not intended to be a report that just goes on a shelf. It really is intended to be an action plan, and we chose those words very deliberately.
Well, let me pivot here to another major question. I'm sure is going to be talked about before you adjourn later on this year, and that's climate change issues. Last year, you voted through a bill, the Clean Heat Standard, that would have started, to reduce carbon emissions by a certain level by 2025. But that failed. The governor vetoed it. The override failed by one vote. So again, my understanding is some kind of bill very similar to that is going to be coming back up again for more discussion and debate and legislative action. Who wants to talk about where that bill is at? Is that going to be something that is indeed going to be coming along, or is it still we're going to have to wait a while longer to fine tune it a little bit?
Well, it's my understanding that it's that everybody's ready to go and have something that looks like that come back up this session. I have the opportunity to take on a leadership role on the leadership team of the Climate Caucus, which is made up of probably close to or more than half the legislature at this point, including everybody sitting at this table. So there's a lot of energy around making sure we figure out a way to get people away from price volatile and polluting fossil fuels and into something that's going to heat homes in a cleaner, more affordable way.
So remind me a little bit about what exactly would be in the bill. Is it simply as incentives to reduce carbon emissions of one sort or another, or how would it actually accomplish that?
Well, I'll let those who actually voted for the bill last year talk about what we're going to do.
No, I will.
I mean, last year's bill is last year's bill.
Yeah.
So the bill that the three of us all voted for that was vetoed. Basically would have created it would have placed an obligation on fuel dealers to achieve a certain number of credits, basically. And they could have achieved these clean heat credits in a variety of ways by selling clean fuels, clean and renewable fuels, by helping their customers weatherize their homes, purchasing the credits. It was a very flexible...
Installing heat pumps.
It was a very flexible marketplace. I can't speak for... The process starts again this year, right? So whatever is the committee of jurisdiction will start by taking testimony and putting ideas on the table and, creating compromise and collaborating and doing all the things that we do in the legislature to try to bring a bill forward that has at its very center the goal of providing more Vermonters with more choices for more affordable renewable heat. That's what we're trying to do.
This winter, particularly this past year, it started earlier than the winter. We've seen the price volatility that Mike talked about really in an extreme way, and aside from the climate considerations, just the pocketbook considerations that, if we can move to a place where Vermonters are not relying on fossil fuels that are not helping our economy at all. I mean, that all of that money, essentially all of that money, what you pay to your fuel dealer goes out of state. I mean, they keep the dealer will keep a little bit, but it's not like solar energy that's being produced here in Vermont or wood heat that it comes from wood or from pellets or from chips that were grown here. So there's a strong economic argument, I think, also for moving that direction.
I think that's where we last time maybe didn't control that narrative well enough, because I agree, and Kathleen has emphasized this all along. This is really, aside, as you said, Dave, aside from all the reasons to do it having to do with climate, this is about getting control of our own destiny. Right now, we are subject to the whims of what's going on internationally, and something can happen anywhere in the globe, and all of a sudden we're in this crisis. This is really about us getting control and doing it in a way that costs less money, is more affordable, and is better for the climate, obviously. But anytime you do that, it's also better for us. But economically, I'm just convinced if we do this right, that people are going to be better off. People talk about it as if it's adding expense. It's not. And what it's going to do is really make it possible for us to be in control, not be subject to what's going on somewhere else in the world and the whims of the markets. And that is good for everybody.
And I think that's why, as Democrats, we have continued to prioritize and invest so much money in programs that help people weatherize their homes,
Yep.
Because then they're living in more comfortable homes, but paying much less for their fuel. Programs that help people install heat pumps, or more renewable heating sources, and also transportation-wise, breaking people free of the gas pump and the swinging prices there by helping people either get into an EV or simply trade in a gas guzzler for a more fuel-efficient car. We have a wide range of incentives that help people with that.
Jim Sullivan told me, and I hope I have this number right, that Bennington County sends $100 million a year out for fuel for between all the different. That's crazy. Mm. And Dave made that point earlier. Mm. We want to keep that money here. Even if it costs as much, let's at least keep it here. But it won't. It'll cost less. Plus, we'll keep it here. So that's a large part of what's going on here.
So there's an economic argument, and there's also the climate argument, and there's a statutory requirement.
That's true.
That the clean heat standard was intended to address, and intended to address in the most efficient, cost-effective way. And if we don't have, and it was a recommendation. It was the leading recommendation of the out of the climate action plan that was produced after the Global Warming Solutions Act was enacted, and short of doing something similar to what was proposed, we will either fall short of those requirements. They're not just goals; they're legal requirements. Or we'll have to come up with some more expensive way to do it.
And every year we wait, it is by definition more expensive.
Yep, and harder to enact.
Yep.
So that's a really important point, Dave.
Yep.
Well, this is a topic I find endlessly fascinating, and there's so many aspects to it. And one of them I'll save for another day, but I'll just throw it out here now, is the NIMBY question. I mean, we all agree, in theory, solar, wind energy, the renewables are the way to go, and would help advance the reduction of carbon emissions and what have you. But there are a lot of people who think, yeah, that's great, but I don't want it where I have to look at it. And, that seems like that's such a difficult problem to get over, is that because there's always so many landfills that are out of sight and screened off and, not visible from anywhere. At some point, to generate the kind of gigawatts we need, we're going to have to put them someplace where, you're going to see them when you drive by.
I think it's important to remember that this is an equity issue, and that when you allow for that endless pushing off of the generation of power from where you live and use that energy to somewhere else, then you're putting what comes along with that generation. Luckily, the consequences of generating power with solar or wind are perhaps less so for the folks who live around those things than a coal plant or something like that. But still consequences, and so I think just understanding that sort of NIMBYism, of course, communities should have input on siting, and that's important, and people should be brought to the table, and we have to come up with that sort of consensus. But ultimately, if you're just refusing to generate any of your electricity or what heats your home in your own community, you're pushing those consequences off onto a different community. And typically, those communities are lower income, Black and brown communities elsewhere.
Yeah.
Point.
Oh, go ahead.
That I just underscoring. I think that's a really important point to bring up, and I'm not a fan of NIMBYism in its many forms. So it rears its head in housing as well, and a lot of other issues. And I just think we all need to kind of remind ourselves that we're all in this together, and the solutions need to be shared. And shared solutions mean, yes, in my backyard. So.
Well, a subject we maybe we'll return to at some point later, but in the time we have left, a couple other points I just wanted to kind of hear from you all about. And one of the questions I had as I was starting to think about what we might talk about is kind of the economics of the state as we look forward into 2023. Last couple of years, the state's been on the receiving end of a huge amount of federal money, unprecedented kind of influx of federal funds. That have been used for a lot of things already. I guess question number one is, how much of that ARPA funding is left? Has it all been spoken for and committed to one thing or another, or is there still a bit of a fund left over to work with?
I think it's all been appropriated. It hasn't necessarily been spent, but there is a deadline out several years in the future that the Fed's set that money has to be spent by. But I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's essentially been allocated or appropriated to either housing or one or another of the many challenges.
So it's kind of back to normal again.
Except
With the oversight thing that we discussed earlier, I think over the summer we started seeing or hearing reports that, programs aren't getting off the ground and dollars aren't going out the door. And so I think Dave is right that it's all been appropriated. So the question is, are the programs getting, stood up? Are the dollars flowing? And I think that's where we're going to really need to spend some time.
Okay.
We also have the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. It will bring another, what's the word? Tranche, thank you, of funding into the state. And then aside from that, the state's revenue picture, the last report, which I guess would have been early December, so through not quite half of a fiscal year, showed stronger than forecasted, stronger than budgeted revenue from our different sources, the income tax and the sales tax, which is important, I think, because the one-time projects with the one-time funding are, by definition, not going to be here 10 years from now, 5 years from now. But to the extent that we can count on an increased, a consistent, sustainable increase in revenue that's annual, then we can continue to fund the many projects that we've spoken about, continue and begin to fund some of the projects that we've spoken about here this afternoon.
On an ongoing basis. So one of the things, just for people listening, is that in very large measure, the ARPA funds were spent on one-time expenditures, housing, weatherization, infrastructure, those kinds of things, where it really just makes sense but it's not committing us to more next year and the next year. So we were pretty smart about spending the ARPA funds. We'll have, as Dave was saying, another round of money coming in for infrastructure and other things, but which will tend to be the same thing for one-time projects. So it's really given the state a real boost and a real opportunity to bring a lot of our infrastructure up. And now we have to watch the state budget and see what works and what doesn't work on an ongoing basis. So we have to be careful about that.
So it's back to the future again,
Yeah,
or back to the past,
future.
or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I forget the numbers. I knew them at one
Yeah.
point, but thanks to the small state minimum, you
Yeah.
know, and Senator Leahy,
Yeah.
you know, the amount of dollars that flowed to Vermont through all the federal pandemic relief programs per capita,
We were number 2.
we ranked, yes,
Yeah.
that's right. We ranked number 2 behind Wyoming or
So
something like some other
Yeah.
low population state. And it's been remarkable. I mean, the per capita dollars that we receive compared to a state like California or something, where, it's transformational. We hope.
We hope. And but maybe broadband also is another area that
Yep.
I know that, Kathleen, this has been an area you've been focused on very closely. That's been helped along mightily by some of the ARPA dollars.
Yeah, and I just happen to know from my notes. No, but we passed a couple years ago. We passed a big rural broadband bill, and that bill invested $150 million to broadband build out all over the state. Those were that allowed us to set up the Vermont Community Broadband Board, and they distributed that $150 million to pre-construction and construction grants. So that money's gone out the door. This year we spent an additional $95 million to continue that build out. So we've been investing a lot of money, and Dave mentioned the IIJA, the Federal Infrastructure Act. That's going to bring us another 100+ million. So a lot of money flowing to broadband build out, and our own Southern Vermont CUD has done incredible work. I mean, they've partnered with Consolidated under its new spin-off or subsidiary called Fidium, which is their fiber, basically their fiber subsidiary. And they have already brought fiber to the home in a number of the member towns of the Southern Vermont CUD at Bennington and Shaftesbury, and Dave might have some more in Dave's area. They're supposed to be rolling through Manchester and Arlington and Sunderland very soon. I know I've already gotten my notifications saying, we'll be hooking you up before too long. And as Mike knows very well, they're scheduled to have some of his communities,
Landgrove, yeah, specifically, and Dorset, but Landgrove being a place with particular trouble when it comes to connecting to the internet, is scheduled for 2023.
Yeah, so if everything stays on schedule or even close to it, we should have fiber to the home available in all 13 towns that belong to the Southern Vermont CUD in Bennington County, which is really, it's remarkable, really.
Yeah, and I think it's a testament to the work that the Communications Union District
Yep.
has done over the past several years in figuring out there are different ways that the problem could be solved and different approaches, and they chose to partner with a business. And I was sort of astonished when I was out knocking on doors this fall in some distant reaches of the town, where literally miles from where there was cable service, they now are connected at a high speed. And if you're like me and live in a section of town that already had service, now you have a choice. And so I took advantage of that choice and cut my bill by about $50, $55, I guess, a month. So that adds up, and having that, so it's not just for people who will be grateful in Landgrove to have anything, but folks who live right here in right along Route 7 or 7A will also have the option, I think, of getting that service and maybe saving some money.
Yeah, and I will never stop praising the members of the Southern Vermont CUD. They are all volunteers. They have been working tirelessly since the CUD was voted into existence 3 years ago or something, and they all deserve medals.
Yep.
Well, before we have to run, I just wanted to kind of throw one more question out there. And Mike, I think I'll throw this one to you, if I may, since I know you have a background in agriculture, in organic farming in particular. How is the state of agriculture in Vermont these days? I mean, it seems like every time the subject comes up, we hear about fewer and fewer dairy farms. It's because the economics are just getting harder and harder for farmers. Is there anything that you're seeing out there that can be done to turn that around, or at least redress that, or you would like to see happen that might be, helping this really iconic sector of the state economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that nobody who lives in Vermont would ever want to see working farmland go away from being such an important part of our fabric of forests and farmland and communities and waterways. And I think that what's really exciting in agriculture right now is all of the work being done to prove what many have known for a long time, which is that farming with soil health in mind is actually beneficial for the climate and can contribute. Agriculture can be part of the solution toward working toward addressing the climate crisis. And so I think it would be, there's recently federally there's been a huge amount of money invested in what they're calling climate smart agriculture projects that are attempting to, sort of prove with data that that the carbon sequestration potential of farming with climate in mind. Some of those projects are happening in Vermont and also largely in the Northeast. And so I think that's a really exciting area to look towards, is how can we invest in our farmers and make sure that the farms that we're investing in, the farmland that we're keeping working, is also doing that important climate work.
Well, yeah, it's hard to imagine Vermont without a pasture with a bunch of cows in there. That's why the Chamber of Commerce way off course, I'm sure. Nothing else. Well, I guess we're going to have to leave it there for today, but I'm sure perhaps maybe we can have you all come back at some point midway through the session, or
Sure.
certainly when it's all over, and we can tally up the scorecard and see what passed and what didn't. But again, I want to thank Representative Kathleen James, Representative Dave Durfee, Representative-elect Mike Rice, soon to be Representative Mike Rice, and Representative Seth Bongartz for being with us and taking the time the last day or two before they have to go back up north and get to work behind the desks in the committee rooms there to come in and share some of their thinking with us. And I hope you found our program interesting. Again, Happy New Year, and we will see you again the next time. Meanwhile, take care, be safe. Thank you.